Hebrews 11, chapter 8. By faith, Abraham what? Obeyed when he was called to go out to a place that he was to receive as an inheritance, and he went out, not knowing where he was going. By faith, he went to live in the land of promise, as in a foreign land, living in tents with Isaac and Jacob, who were his son and grandson, heirs with him of the same promise. For he, Abraham, was looking forward to a city that has foundations, whose designer and builder is who? Is God. By faith, Sarah, his wife, herself received power to conceive even when she was past the age, since she considered him faithful who had promised. Therefore, from one man, Abraham, and him as good as dead, which means he was a super old guy, were born descendants, as many as the stars of heaven and as many as innumerable grains of sand by the seashore. These all died in faith, all these people that we talked about, not having received the things promised, but having seen them and greeted them from afar, and having acknowledged that they were strangers and exiles on the earth. For people who speak this way, make it clear that they are seeking a homeland. If they had been thinking of that land from which they had gone out, they would have the opportunity to return. But as it is, they desire a better country, that is a heavenly one. Therefore, because of that, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared for them a city. By faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac his son, and he who had received the promises was in the act of offering up his only son. So right here in 17, it's a conflated verse that talks about the story of when Abraham, who we'll talk about, has his son Isaac, his only son. As an old man, he has a baby boy. Eventually, when that baby boy becomes a teenager, a young man, God tells him to sacrifice Isaac, to put him to death. It is so confusing to Abraham that God would ask him to do something like that, because he doesn't ask people to put innocent people to death, much less his heir of the promise. But Abraham had so much faith in God, and here's the point, so much hope in God, he was willing to put his adult son to death, even though he was the line that God had promised to come through, because of this right here. In verse 19, he considered that God was able even to raise him from the dead, from which, figuratively speaking, he did receive him back. So God, in the story, allows a ram to be caught in a thicket, and Abraham takes him and sacrifices the ram instead of his son. So God provides the sacrifice instead of his son. But the point was that Abraham had so much faith in God, he was willing to put the heir of the promise to death, not knowing, like, how am I going to have more kids? Because he was the one that the promise was supposed to come through. But Abraham had that much faith in God. Verse 20, by faith Isaac invoked future blessings then on Jacob and Esau, which were his sons later, and Abraham's grandsons. Not many of us can say that we have hope in all areas of our life. Many of us look around in our lives and go, I have no hope. I mean, I've lived a little while, and I can tell you that there are areas of my life that I just don't have hope in. I don't know if my kids will follow God. I don't know if my marriage is going to survive another Christmas, honestly. I don't have much security at my job. I don't even know where I'm going. I don't even have hope that I can even make the right call in my own life. And you know what's interesting is that out of the pages of Scripture comes a story of, probably, apart from Jesus himself, the most famous man in history, Abraham. He is not some plastic figure that comes walking out of Scripture. He is not some Sunday school story that didn't exist. This is a real man who had lost all hope that anything was going to get better. He lived in darkness, and that's what we see in number 1. Abraham was living in the dark. Abraham was living in the dark. And so I want to encourage you this morning. I want to come get you, okay? Wherever you're at in your life, right now, I want to come get you in your hopelessness. And I want to give you some encouragement this morning. But I want us to take a look at one of the most famous men in history, because we tend to think, oh, these are Bible people. They're not real people. These are just stories of people that didn't really go through what I go through. And the beauty of studying Scripture is to say, these are not plastic people that lived in some fairyland. These are real people that hit time, space, history, real dirt like you and me. And they had relational issues. They had occupational issues. They had spiritual issues they had to deal with. And that's exactly what happens to Abraham. He lived in the dark in many areas of his life. Let's take a look at it. So I'm going to give you a little background. Some of you guys know exactly who Abraham is, and some of you guys have no idea who Abraham is at all. So let me give you a little background on Abraham. Abraham was born around 2100 BC, so about 4,000 years from our day. Jesus was born about 2,000 years ago. So Jesus almost perfectly splits the time frame from us to Jesus and from Jesus to Abraham. So we are split almost on both sides of history from Jesus to Abraham. About 2,000 years before Jesus, in the city of Ur in Mesopotamia, near modern Baghdad in Iraq. So we have Marines here that have gone and toured in our last war in Iraq, and we had a battle in Baghdad a few years ago. About 100 miles from modern-day Baghdad was this ancient city of Ur. So put this in your mind, ready? I'm going to place you in history. 4,000 years ago, there's a man named Abram. Hadn't even been named Abraham yet. He grows up really like a modern-day Iraqi. He's a Middle Eastern man who lives in an ancient Mesopotamian city of Ur. Out of nowhere, God calls him, and we'll see that in Genesis chapter 12. At this point, ready? Here's the history he's living in. He is living as an old man with his wife Sarah, who can't have kids. In our modern day, if you can't have kids, you can just run on down to the doctor and they'll try to help you out. 4,000 years ago, not so much. No doctors to help. There's only God. And so he lives with disappointment every day. Him and his wife live with real disappointment that they can't have children. Because in that day, it was known as a curse from God if you couldn't bring forth kids. Societally, there was pressure that you couldn't bring forth children. So imagine Abraham, who was a wealthy man of his day, he can't even produce kids. And yet something else happens too in Abraham's life. It was here that in Ur that Abraham found his wife Sarai, and after the death of his brother Haran, he set out with his father Terah and their clan to live in Canaan. So Abraham has a brother named Haran, which is also the name of the city actually they're going to be heading to. His brother dies. Now, I don't know if you've ever lost somebody in your family, but it's times like these when you have holidays that most of those heartache comes through. This is the first Christmas without mom. My brother died of cancer, 10 years ago, and gosh, I really miss him. And his kids are growing up without him, and kind of me as the uncle, I kind of have to raise him. We live with real heartache in our lives, and oftentimes it's holidays that reminds us of our heartache. Or the dysfunction in our family. Anybody have a Thanksgiving? Nothing brings out dysfunction in a family lineage like a good Thanksgiving. You just want peace and to sit around the table and drink water, and Uncle George wants to bring, Jägermeister in a flask or whatever to the party and get bombed right at the table, and he ends up falling in the turkey or whatever, and you're like, Jesus, why did you put me in this family? Could it be more dysfunctional, God? Help. You feel hopeless for your family when you get together at these family functions and you're like a family barbecue or whatever, and you go, I can't believe I'm related to these freaks of nature. Nothing brings out the dysfunction of your family like holidays, and nothing brings out heartache if you've lost people like holidays. There's nothing that brings it out like when family's supposed to be together, you either realize, wow, we're really jacked up, or, gosh, I really miss the people that aren't here. And Abraham went through that. He lost his younger brother, Haran. He died. He lives without his brother, and now they're going to move the whole family. Terah, Abraham's dad, is going to move the whole clan, and they're going to travel to the city of Haran. Now, how many of you guys were born and lived your whole life in Temecula? You lived your whole life here. Okay, I see a few youngsters raising their hands. Nobody else raised their hands in here, which means everybody's pilgrims to Temecula, including myself. We live in a very nuclear type of family scenario where it's usually dad, mom, 2.5 kids, and they travel as a little nuclear family to places. 4,000 years ago, whole clans would move together. And you know who decided that? The patriarch. So watch this. Abraham is like 75 years old. He's a grown old man. But you know what? His dad, Terah, goes, we're going to move. Abraham could have said, I don't want to move. I'm a grown man. I'm going to stay right here in Ur. But you know what? Dad-o, probably 90-year-old dad, I guess he would have had him when he's 15. Okay, maybe a 100-year-old dad. But old dad goes, you know what? You know what? We're going to move everybody. And it says the whole clan, not just a nuclear family, and you didn't just get to go, I don't want to go. When the patriarch goes, we're going, everybody goes. All the kids and their kids and their kids' kids and kids' kids. So while you think you and your 2.5 person family moving is a big deal, imagine hundreds of people picking up and moving together. And that's exactly what Terah, Abraham's dad, and Abraham and all of the kids and all of their brothers and sisters and everybody moved to the city of Haran. I want to show you this map because this will give you a good idea. So way down here at the right-hand side, you see Babylon and Ur. That's where Abraham was born and found Sarah, and he lived the majority of his life. 75 years he lived in Ur. Terah decides, after the death of his son and Abraham's brother, Haran, to move to Canaan, which is modern-day Israel. So they had to go around the Arabian desert, which is quite a long trek on foot, and they ended up only getting halfway to Haran, and they end up settling there. And I want to show you another darkness area of Abraham's life that happens actually in Haran. Halfway there to Canaan, they stopped, the whole clan stopped and settled in the city of Haran where Terah ended up dying. So now watch, Abraham has lived for years with no child. It's a heartache of his every day. He's now 75. He's past the point of having kids. His wife is about 10 years younger than him. She is past the point of having kids. Every day they go, we missed an opportunity. We will never have kids. We live with eternal disappointment. There's no hope. Zero. I've lost my younger brother. I buried him back in a city I'll never go back to. I'll never go back and visit his grave. Now I'm in Haran. My dad dies. I bury my dad in Haran. He's lost family members. He lives with disappointment every day about his ability to have kids. He lives in darkness, in disappointment, and in death. When God first spoke to Abraham to leave Haran to go to the promised land, which is modern-day Israel, he had been married for years with his wife Sarai, past childbearing age, and no ability to produce a legitimate heir to his house and fortune. For years, Abraham dealt with the darkness of death and the disappointment of not seeing his dreams fulfilled. Abraham had no way of processing the why of death in his family or of producing a child with his wife, but trusted in the promise of God. A believer's inability allows God's ability to be realized. Let me tell you this. If you have no hope in some area of your life, understand that God builds disappointment into life to teach you to trust him. Ready? It's possible that if you don't ever get to a point of hopelessness in your heart, it's possible that you never really learn to trust God. Because if you never get to a point of hopelessness like, I don't know if we'll ever survive this, then there's always the ability that you have inside of you to go, I'm going to do this. I can get through this. I can fix our marriage. I can fix my kids. I can fix my job. Rather than saying, God, I need your help. You got to give me wisdom. You got to give me the ability to serve you. But you got to take me by the hand and empower me to do it because I'm helpless. I'm hopeless. And that's exactly where Abraham was. Abraham was living in the dark when then God came and met him in Haran and called him to go to the promised land. Number two, so number one is Abraham was living in the dark. Number two, Abraham looked forward to the light. Abraham looked forward to the light. I don't know if any of you guys have ever been really scared living in the dark. Anybody been in the dark and been like, I think all those slasher movies that I watched when I was a teenager are coming true right now? Okay. So it's funny how absence of light makes you scared. It causes you to think some things are real that are not real. Like all of a sudden you hear chainsaws going when you're scared, right? Anybody Texas Chainsaw Massacre? Okay, no one? Okay, good. Because you're Christians, you don't watch that stuff. Okay, good, I like that. That's what I was testing you to see if you knew about that movie. All of a sudden, in the dark, in fear, we act in ways that if we could see with light, we wouldn't be scared. Now watch. God oftentimes will put us in situations that will cause us to desire Him in our lives. If we can control and see everything in our lives, we get to the point where we don't even need God because we have everything under control. We're not hopeless. It's right here. I can see everything. I'm in control of everything. God allows circumstances in our lives to block the way that we think we're supposed to go, and it causes us to be hopeless. Watch. If you don't learn to trust God in hopelessness, you will continually live in depression. You will continually live in anxiety because it's you trying to produce the solution. Watch, humans can't produce hope. Hope has to come from the exterior. If you could conjure up hope inside of you, people would never be hopeless because they just go to that little part of their heart, go, let's build some hope. This is hope being built, like this. And the reality is, you can't get hope from a pill. You can't get hope from wishing things were different. You can't get hope. Hope must come from without. And hope comes from God. And Abraham was totally in the dark in most areas of his life. He's getting to be old. He's on the downhill side of his life. And hope's pretty much gone in many of these areas. And God put him in a place of hopelessness so that God could shine. And if you and I don't learn in our hopelessness, in our times of hopelessness, to turn to God, you will always live in anxiety because you will always try to be the solution for your problems that you can never be. But with God, there is always hope in the dark. With God, there is always hope where there's hopelessness. But you and I must choose to follow God. And Abraham does choose to follow God. And let's see what happens. Abraham looked forward to the light. From the darkness of despair, God made a promise that Abraham would have innumerable descendants and would bless the whole earth. So you're in Hebrews right now. Turn to the very front of your Bible. The very first book is Genesis, which is where the story of Abraham is, that Hebrews 11 is referring to. Genesis chapter 12, which is the story of Abraham. Genesis chapter 12, verse 1. And the Lord said to Abram, which was his name before his name was given as Abraham, go from your country and from your kindred and from where? And from your father's house to the land that I will show you. To leave your clan was a big deal. Now, for many of us that can't wait for our kids to leave the nest, we're like kicking them out. 4,000 years ago, it was a big deal for you, even as a grown man, to say, I'm leaving the clan. I'm striking out on my own. Because you found strength and security in numbers. So if you're in an agricultural area, you're really setting yourself out to be abused if you separate yourself from a clan, from your family. And Abraham was called away from his clan after his father dies to go to the promised land. God calls Abram and he listens. And in verse 2, and I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great so that you will be a blessing. You want to know something about Christmas? Let me help you. Your blessing should not stop with you. I'm going to go on a side tangent. We're going to grab this. Ready? Your blessing should not stop with you. In fact, if your blessing stops with you, you could legitimately say it's not really a blessing. Because in many ways, you are just a conduit to bless other people. God blesses you not so all of your blessings can stop with you. You are blessed to be a blessing. Even Abraham, who's going to be given land in Canaan, he was given that land not just to bless him, but to bless us. How? From Abraham, guess who comes almost 2,000 years later? Jesus. From Abraham comes Christ. So we talk about the advent of Jesus. The advent of Jesus only happens because Abraham was faithful to walk, even when it was dark, trusting God that he was going to bring about his promise. Jesus is a Jew, is an Israelite. Guess who the first Jew was? An Iraqi. Does that blow your mind? It's a mind blower to think Abraham's the first Jew, but he's from Mesopotamia. He's probably Babylonian. God calls him and makes out of him a great nation, though he can't produce children on his own. But his blessing from God was to bless other people. Amen. And you know what Christmas is? Christmas, as we celebrate it in the West, is always about us. What am I getting? Where's my present? Unfortunately for us, presents go like this. They stop with us. We are the backstop for blessing because we want everything to bless us. We don't want our blessings to bless other people because we want it to be all about us. And the funny part about God's blessing, he never blesses us and to have it just stop here. He says, Abraham, I'm going to bless you, not so it stops with you. I'm going to bless you so you can be a blessing. In fact, there's no more miserable place than to realize that everything's about you. You want to be depressed? Have everything have to be about you. Because the problem is that nobody can ever make you happy all the time. But you know what's amazing? Is if you are willing to be a blessing to other people. Here, have an empty box. Let it bless you. You know what's amazing? Is when you bless others, you feel blessed. The economy of God is not be a blessing so that you can just get something. It's be a blessing so you can feel the blessing of God in your life. There's nothing like filling your heart with the joy of God when you serve other people. When everything has to be about you, when you're the black hole of blessing, it always intake and never output, there's no more miserable place. And you'll never feel more hopeless than when everything has to be about you. But when you bless others, it's amazing how you feel hope. Because you want to know why? You could be the hand of hope that other people need. And when you are the hand of hope, when somebody cares about you, somebody blesses you, it's amazing how you feel blessed because somebody's blessing you, but it's amazing how the blesser gets blessed even more. I know when I try to bless other people, man, sometimes I feel like I'm ripping them off because I feel more blessed than anything I've even done for them because my heart is full of joy. And so I say that at this time of year because let's realize that it's not always about us. It's about what God does through us. We are blessed to be a blessing. It shouldn't stop with just us. It's a good lesson for your kids. Don't get them everything they want. I move on. Okay, good. From God's initial promise, Abraham waited patiently for 25 years, from 75 to 100 years old, for God to deliver Isaac to him. You want to talk about hopeless? Abraham has no kids. And he's 75, and God tells him, I'm going to give you a boy. I'm going to give you a child. Now imagine you're at the nursing home as a 75-year-old, and God shows up and goes, you don't have any kids? Nope. I'm going to give you a boy. Now imagine you're 75. You're ready to get in a Winnebago and tour the country. At 75, you're not ready to build, put the crib back up and have a infant. But Abraham goes, hey, you know what? It's not about me. It's about you, God. So even though it's going to be inconvenient at 75, I wish you would have showed up in my 30s. Seems like you showed up a little late. This is even crazier. Ready? He shows up at 75. Abraham, I'm going to give you a son. Abraham's like, oh, God, I don't know. Did you forget how physiology works? Those days are gone. My wife, she's not having babies. She's like in her 70s. So I don't think this is going to work, God. Do you remember how you build bodies? They don't work like that anymore. God's like, I got you. Watch this. At 75, you think, oh man, that's late. God doesn't show up to give him a son for 25 more years. Imagine you're 75. This is 75. You have sexual relations with your wife. Are you pregnant yet, sweetie? Nope, not yet. All right, 80. Have any babies yet? Nope. 87. Have any babies yet? Nope. 98. Babies yet, sweetie? 90 stinking 9 years old. He's 100 years old. God, we thought he was late at 75 years old. God waits 25 more years till he's 100. And Sarah's like 90. How many of you women would be stoked to have a baby at 90? Yay, babies at 90. Are you joking? You're only awake for like 4 hours of the day or whatever, goodness sakes. I mean, imagine having an infant at 90. You'd have to put like a bassinet on the front of a walker or whatever. You're like, you're at Walmart and people go, oh, I love your great-great-great-great-great-grandchild. No, I just had him last week. I mean, that's the kind of crazy story that happened here. You want to talk about hopeless? There isn't any more hopeless than Abraham. He's had his family die. He left his clan. He's alone. He has no child. And God shows up and gives him light and hope. The funny thing is we think God's late, but God is never late. Because God's timing is better than our timing. God's wisdom is greater than our wisdom. So don't think, oh, I keep asking and I keep asking and I keep asking this thing, and God says no. Don't think in your mind he's saying no because he hates you or wants to punish you. Many times God is saying no in the moment to wait for later. Many times the blessing that we get will not be right now. But if we are faithful like Abraham, we will see the goodness of God in this life. We might not see it all, but we will see much of the blessing of God if we are faithful to follow him. Even in our hopelessness, God will be our hope. From God's initial promise, Abraham waited for 25 years from 75 to 100 for God to deliver Isaac to him. God often increases the wait to increase the faith. God often increases the wait. So if you've been waiting a long time for your kids to stop being lame, keep on praying. Because many of us as parents, we go, God, my kids are adults now. I don't think they follow you. I don't even think they love you. I remember myself as a young adult, God, and I just don't want my kids to go through what I went through to find you. And so we as adults feel heartache in our lives. But you know what? God loves your kids more than you love them. God cares more about the things you care about than you care about them. You got to give those things to God because God controls everything. Marriage isn't working the way you want it to go. You say, God, help me to be the wife I need to be, regardless of how my husband reacts to me. Help me to be the loving, supportive wife that I need to be inside of my home. Help me to not be a detriment to my home, but help me to be a blessing to my home and my husband. Your wife isn't the lovely lily of the valley she used to be. I love you, sweetie, is what you say every day, is you just get up and go, Jesus, help me to love my wife, even though she's disrespectful to me, even though she's against me, it seems like. Help me to be a man of God. Help me not to return anger for anger, but help me to love my wife like you love me. Watch, ready? You can think there's hopelessness in your marriage, but with God, there's always hope. But you can't keep doing the same things, wanting there to be different. You can't look for differences if you keep doing the same things. You got to change who you are, hear the calling of God, change who you are, and you'll be amazed how hopeless becomes hope. Because God changes hearts. God changes circumstances. God changes people. God changes your kids' lives. God changes your life. God can give you hope in your marriage. Things that you long thought were dead, God can bring to life. I can't do those things. You can't do those things. You can't conjure up hope. You can't conjure up life. But God can. God is the eternal hope of those who hope in him. Abraham's hope, a portion of Abraham's hope was realized in his lifetime, that Isaac, his son, was eventually born to him. But the rest of God's promise was realized thousands of years after his death, down to our day, where Abraham's descendants, the Israelites or the Jews, have been innumerable down through history. The payoff for a believer's hope might not happen in their lifetime. So let me help you with this. Ready? You might go to your grave and your kids don't love God. But guess what? God outlives you. And God will be faithful to do his work inside of your kids' lives, even after you're gone. So while everything you want in this life from God might not be realized while you're alive, realize that God, who oversees history, will change hearts even after you're gone and I'm gone. So watch, even Abraham looked down through the corridors of time and had faith that even though he only had one son, Isaac, God was going to do his work. And through innumerable Jews and Israelites that came after Abraham, eventually there's Jesus, the Messiah, the Savior of the world, comes through Joseph and Mary. And that shows us that God, through Abraham, had faith and hope. Even after Abraham died, thousands of years later, God was still faithful. So here's my point to you. Never give up hope, even if you don't see it with your own eyes. Because God, who controls history, can still get his work done. So we have faith even if we don't see it with our own eyes. Some of it we'll see in this life, but if it's not everything, believe that God's at work anyway. Additionally, God's ultimate payoff and his promise to bless all the people of the world through Abraham was salvation through the arrival of Jesus. Abraham was blessed because his faith in God was not stuck in a momentary circumstance, but looked beyond himself to the time of Jesus. Biblical hope does not just have the possibility of coming true, but the certainty of coming true. And I want to make this point as we close. Biblical hope, the kind I'm talking about, is not wishful thinking. It's not a laundry list that you give Santa. I really would like the new phone. What's wrong with your phone you have right now? Oh, it's not the good one. It's not the Apple II 5S Turbo that cleans the house. The funny part is we have everything we need. And we need to look to God and realize that our hope isn't in stuff, our hope is in God. And all the blessings that we have are temporary that we must bless other people with. It shouldn't stop with us. We are the hand of hope to those who need to see God in their lives. Many times you will be the hope that people need to see. Abraham was the hope that people needed to see on this earth to bring about Jesus. And you, in many ways, and I, through God, are the hope that we bring into the world through the power of God. Abraham was blessed because his faith in God was not stuck in momentary circumstances, but looked beyond himself to the time of Jesus. Biblical hope does not just have the possibility of coming true, but the certainty of coming true. Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness. That's a different way of thinking about a wishful thinking rather than hope-filled thinking. I know it's going to come true. Why? Because God controls history. I don't just wish it to come true. I know God's going to do it. I don't know when or how, but God will be faithful to do it. And that can give you hope because we believe in the power of God. The coming of Jesus into the world is the ultimate example of a hope promised, waited for, and realized. Believers have an anchor of hope that his promise that they wait patiently for will have an eternal payoff someday. So let me encourage you today as you leave. If there's areas of your life you have no hope in, let God come in to give you hope. Ready? Be willing to change yourself to realize hope. If your marriage needs work on that inside yourself through the power of God. Hey, if you're a jerk at work, change. Because maybe work is bad because you're bad. You'll be amazed how hope from God can transform your life and the lives of those around you. When you are filled with hope that can come from the God who gives hope.